Hello, everyone. I'm your podcast host, Brent Van Conant, bringing you another in our series of recordings focused on practical advances in soil health for Western Canadian farmers. These recordings are part of a larger soil health initiative coordinated by Assiniboine College, bringing together a network of many Western Canadian grower groups and other organizations to continue to advance soil health in ways that accommodate the unique circumstances of each farm. This podcast and the overall soil initiative are made possible through the generous support of the Weston Family Foundation. If you like what you are seeing and hearing, tell a friend and feel free to check out our website, soilhealthnetwork.ca, to find out more about our soil health project. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to everyone joining us today in the next in our series of podcast interviews. And I'm really pleased today that we have Lana Shaw from the Southeast Research Farm in Redvers, Saskatchewan, joining us today. A little background on Lana. She comes to us with a Master's of Science degree from the University of Saskatchewan, Science and Agriculture. She's worked for about 20 years in agronomy extension roles, first at the provincial government in Saskatchewan, and then she took on a role at the Southeast Saskatchewan Farm. I'm told that that was a bit of a fixer-upper role, so we'll talk about that before we get done. In that role, you conduct a whole bunch of research trials with different crops, and you've created a special niche around intercropping that has people from this country and all over the place interested in your work, and especially producers who are interested in advancing intercropping across the prairies. In addition to the sort of pat, I went to I had a little fun and called a couple of your colleagues and said, "What would you say about Lana that she might not say about herself?" And I was really pleased to hear that you were described as having a tremendous passion for agriculture, specifically in crop research, that you know that that's a way to make a positive impact for farmers, that you look for opportunities to collaborate with other researchers, and you understand sort of the multiplier effect of how this can advance outcomes for others, that you're an influencer, an enabler, and one of the connectors of farmers and agronomists for key ways to innovate cropping systems and advance soil health. You were described as practical and fearless, and you don't minimize or hide challenges, but you don't let them get in the way either. And then the last one that I really enjoyed was those of us who know her also know she has a very big heart. So that's I wish that people would introduce me in that way, but welcome, and I appreciate the work that you've done on behalf of Southeast area and how much that's being appreciated right across the prairies and other places. So welcome today.
Thank you.
What is it that got you especially interested in crops and crop systems? How did that begin in your early career?
Um, I think it was largely an undergrad. I was doing a class on world crops with Graham Scholes. I think I'm getting that right.
Okay.
And and I actually ended up TAing that class because I did so well in it. I TA'd it in my I think maybe when I was in them, I think it was when I was in fourth year, I ended up TAing it. But I had done a study of a cropping system in India where it's a slash and burn agriculture system, which is wildly different from how we do cropping here. And
Right.
a really deep dive on that because I was just kind of fascinated by how, like, there's a long-standing, productive, functional system there that seems from the outside to be not a normal way to farm. And so
Okay.
what are the weaknesses there? What are the challenges going into the future? How has it lasted for many, many generations to be productive and what's threatening it for the
Right.
future. And I think that's what kind of got me thinking more along the lines of the cropping systems and the future of them and the resiliency. I don't think I've talked about that. It's sort of a little bit of an origin story for that cropping systems piece
Mm,
before. But so I like to look at big picture. Like, yeah, there are agriculture systems made up of many little components. So you can go do it, get really into
sure.
fertility, or really into
Yeah.
pests, or really into weeds or whatever. But but my interest is really at more high level. Is this functional? Are there major fault lines in our agriculture system that puts it at risk or makes it unstable?
Yeah.
Because that's really important for the future of agriculture. People need to be watching the big picture, not just watching the very little details of
Right.
things.
Well, I think I read it in an interview of yours that if you were a doctor, you'd be considered a general practitioner, not a specialist. And
Yeah.
what you just described makes lots of sense. And boy, the if you saw something that was way out of the box in India, then that probably opened your eyes to think further out of the box here in Western Canada than some might.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. And and um, the move from being a provincial uh, specialist to wandering out of your home territory and taking on, if I've got this right, a research farm that was getting pretty close to its last legs and maybe hadn't found its purpose.
Mhm.
Um, that that sounds like a big challenge to take on as a
Yeah.
young professional. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how it's now a well recognized research facility. So
It
tell us
is.
the turnaround story.
The turnaround story, I had you know, some flexibility in being able to start on that full time. And I mean that I kind of needed a break from working full time because some very sad things had happened in my personal life, leaving me a widow with two very young children.
I'm sorry to hear that.
When I left the provincial government in Outlook, I was sort of striking out and had um, gotten I ended up getting married to someone in the Southeast. That someone is now the working at the Southeast Research Farm.
Hmm.
Um, and so I took it on as something that I could do on a part-time basis that I wanted a way of being able to prove something to myself, I
Hmm.
guess. I wanted a lot of autonomy, which you don't always get in the provincial government. You're generally working under somebody
Yeah.
doing what they tell you to do.
Yeah.
And I wanted a role where I could create something that's not just my own, but that reflects my curiosity and my values. Um, and that's kind of what happened. So I found a very broke down situation. And I've said before that I figure the people of Redvers probably were wondering what sort of purgatory I had inflicted on myself. Like, what did you do in your past life to deserve this purgatory? And it was for a lot of years. Like I had no bathroom at the research farm. We were literally having to go use a shovel. Um, we were just sort of ridiculous level of lack of facilities going on for a lot of years. And that kind of has carried on up until maybe 4 years ago, where we're had we've gradually been able to improve the facilities. But
Yeah.
the thing that I started out with was saying, like, we need to develop competency here, and then the research will you prove that you can do it, and then the research will start arriving because
Right.
there's no other research close enough to here to be competition. And there's a lot of work there's a lot of research to be done. And so that what was lacking in the place was having the a person that could build that program, that could leverage contacts and networks, and
Okay.
um, there had been a high turnover in the managers, and one of the pitfalls of working out in a very rather remote little research station is you're working by yourself a lot until you can build it to a level that where you're not by yourself
Yeah.
anymore.
So the choices of the places where you were going to prove capability, or the kinds of work that you could show that you're good at. But there was some conscious choices there, including what many people would consider, at least early in the game, a bit controversial about what are we doing planting two crops together? That seems like crazy
Yeah,
stuff. What what got you on that theme and kept you on that theme when there was probably a few doubters around?
yeah. Um, there were some people on our board who had been paying attention to the doings of the Bismarck area soil health people.
Hmm.
Um, so like some of the cover crop things, tillage radishes, there some of that was there was some buzz in the local area, but I knew of some intercropping trials that had been done in the Outlook area from when I worked there. There had been
Okay.
some irrigated intercropping trials done back in the late 80s, early 90s, and I had written up some of that, and I was always very curious about it. So I figured if I'm starting a research program, then I want to work on something that I have some curiosity about. And
Hmm.
so I wrote up lots of different projects on lots of things, but that was one of them where I had
Okay.
some curiosity about this. There is like the Combine Forum where Colin Rosengren was talking to farmers, various farmers, about that he was doing this intercropping stuff. Scott Chalmers at Melita and Chris Holtapple at Indian Head had been doing some intercropping work that was really successful just before I started at SURF. So there was, um, we're just trying to do something like that
Okay.
locally. And yeah, there was some people going, is this really a on our board saying, is this really a sensible thing to do? And and it kind of it came to a head a bit. I had to keep it as a fairly minor component of what we do. And we focused a lot on variety trials,
Hmm.
grain variety trials, fertility trials, like all the meat and potatoes of the research farm, we were doing that.
Sure.
So the as long as it was a fairly minor component, it wasn't really raising a lot of red flags. But there was one of the previous board members that said, well, why aren't you doing the exact same thing as what Indian Head is doing, only with far less resources and staff? And I said,
That's
well,
why.
I I don't I think then we're always going to be the less than the the imitator trying to do what imitate what another research farm is very good at.
Yeah.
Why would I try to do that if that's not where we're kind of
Yeah.
leading? And I like when I first got here, the expectation was from some quarters was that we would work on wheat and canola because that's most of what the farmers were growing. And I said, well, they already know how to grow wheat and canola. So why would I try to show them how to grow wheat and
Yeah.
canola? I'm not even going to be able to grow wheat and canola as well as they are currently,
Right.
arguably, for a lot of years. But I do know how to grow quite a lot of other different crops.
Yeah.
And so we are going to be a testing ground for umpteen different crops that are relatively minor for the area. So we built that up to over 20 different species of grain crops in a given year. And I can't imagine that there's very many research farms that every year grow over 20 different species of grain crops.
That
I
sounds brave to me.
I think we're going to put a word search in the local newsletter with all of the 20 different grain crops and see how many people can even recognize the names of them and can find them in a little word search. And then we'll have to have a prize for the winner.
So looping this around to kind of systems that you saw in India and the kind of the core of what's expected in Canada, and where where we could tweak that for purposes of, greater profit and sustainability.
Mhm.
Where, um, where are you seeing those sort of possibilities uh, in intercropping or or different one of those other 20
Broadly.
crops that
Yeah.
have some real potential impact for soil health and
Mhm.
that just that farmers could get what they need, you know,
Yeah.
that
I I think one of the core things that we're doing is dismissing this false dichotomy, the false choice between either you're doing something good for the soil and the environment or you're doing something good for profitability. I outright reject that those are two separate options.
yeah,
Um, there is a lot of middle ground where we can, like, profitability is fundamentally necessary. And you can't sacrifice that even in the medium term, or like once in a while you can lose money. You don't set out and plan to lose money. You
right,
don't say, I'm going to set out and plan a crop this year where I'm pretty sure I'm going to lose money. um, Everything you're doing is to try to be profitable, otherwise someone else will be farming that land pretty soon.
fair enough.
So um, the profitability is core, but also we just had a strategic planning meeting with the research farm, and our vision is long. Our vision is far ahead, and it's not extractive in that we're trying to see how many more crops we can pull out of this soil before it's wrecked.
Right.
And I don't, I think there's a lot of people that don't really realize that there's better ways to go about this, or you
Okay.
can reduce the amount of soil erosion, the amount of compaction, just general destruction of the asset that's our land.
Mhm.
That it doesn't have to be
So
done.
what does where are the opportunities for innovative cropping practices to give something back to the soil to it either
Mm.
either diminish the losses or literally build? When you think
Yeah.
about cropping systems, where are the places where that's getting clear and clear to you that that's possible?
I I think we're trying to do these soil health principles in smart ways, and having that living cover on the soil for longer periods of time
Hmm.
is the systems that we're going to have to figure out. So some of the things we've been prioritizing working on is the fall camelina.
Okay.
That's a new oil seed that can be planted in the fall that's surviving our winters, that could be a new Cinderella crop for the prairies. That's really interesting. And
Yeah.
um, having that combined with some of these, there's multi-species, they call them cover crop mixes basically, and interspersing those as like as an annual forage within our grain systems is having very good effects on improving quality of soil. So I think it's getting away from this. We plant in the spring, we harvest in the fall, max yield of those of a very small subset of crops, and that's the only options. Well, it's not.
So that mix, that cover crop mix, is that for on a shoulder or is that for a full season that it
They're
take?
full season.
Okay.
And so, yes, that means that somebody needs to be able to make use of that. But I think it's going to become a very important occasional thing that's done on land
Hmm.
to give it a break, like from weed cycles, from disease cycles, from compaction, from a whole lot of things that's problematic and inherent in our annual cropping system.
Right.
It would help with kochia. It'll help with a lot of other things. It's actually what we did on the 2 quarters of land that we bought recently. That it was weedy, it was compacted, it was salty, it was waterlogged, it was kind of a mess. And so the first year we had it, we did a full season cover crop and had it all sold as silage. It was rented out and it went as silage, and some of it got put in a bale. And the feedback we got from that farmer that had been farming that land for 30 years because he was renting it from us. We used to own it.
Hmm.
Um, was that it was far, far better, more trafficable, and he could seed a lot closer to the water bodies than he could in the adjacent piece of land, which had been farmed identically for the last 30 years, essentially identically. And it's because we're getting better water infiltration, having better aggregation in the soil. So it's not
In
the
a
only,
in a
but I think it's
in a single season is the strategy there.
for you put that in one season, figure out if you're not a livestock farmer, you figure out how can I make some arrangement with someone that will
Yeah.
result in some money coming in. Or like on the irrigation districts, they would rent out land for one season to the potato growers, and then the potato growers grow a crop on that land, and then it goes back into regular other production. Maybe that's what needs to happen.
Right.
Obviously, there's logistics and things that has to go into it, but
Yeah.
that's a way that there can be some livestock integration in some ways that is really important for breaking some of those cycles. But then
I
also the winter crops, that's going to break some of these
yeah.
cycles that we're having also. So and then yes, intercropping. I like the intercropping. There's some of the cover crops that can have a fit in certain situations. And some of them that we're exploring in a new project right now is
Okay.
underseeding cover crops. So we seed them
Hmm.
in the fall with the main crop and then try to have them muddle along. They don't have to be happy, but we're trying to have them survive, at least it's on certain parts of the landscape, so that in the fall they're growing after harvest. Maybe they're still growing the next spring. Maybe they've self winter killed. Um, I think if we are going to see cover crops on the more the dry-ish parts of the prairies, I think that's the strategy that we would have to use rather than fall seeding cover crops. That's
Is
iffy at
I'm
best.
thinking that's a tough sell to
Yeah.
asking people to drag their air drills out in the middle of
Yes,
harvest season.
it is. Well, and it's also a tough sell that you're burning diesel fuel to go and seed a cover crop that you're never going to harvest. That doesn't really make sense from a greenhouse gas perspective or a cost and fuel perspective or a time perspective.
Mhm.
Unless you're going to go around and harrow it anyway and you want to broadcast some seed out in front of the harrows, and well, then it's not even an extra pass. So okay,
Right.
that's fine. But to do a special pass just for seeding cover crops, that makes it a very expensive operation,
Yeah.
and nobody is going to show up with the kind of money necessary to incentivize that enough to make that take hold.
Right.
But and I've got ideas about prescription maps for underseeded cover crops in things like canola and oats. So we could make a prescription map where we
Okay.
only put cover crops on the areas where we think it's going to do the most good.
Ah,
Where would that be? Probably the low spots, possibly the knolls. We don't know. So we have a project right now that hopefully will try to learn something intelligent about that. We
so
should have.
in a site specific way, you change the biomass in in the
It could
shoulder
be
seasons
it could be
of when the
on
crop.
off. You could, if I go and look where the volunteer crops are growing in the fall, that's where we could grow, where there would be moisture and resources
Okay.
and nutrients to be able to support something like that.
So that's an interesting point. How how do you calculate in, or how do we think about calculating in the water use? If we know we want water to grow crops that we sell,
Mhm.
and it sucks when we have too much, and it's not great when we have too little, and it's a hard
Yeah.
thing to predict.
Mhm.
So the logic of building cropping plans that include this uncertainty of moisture, where are the innovations or the opportunities there to not to get more benefits than risks by
Yeah.
changing cropping systems.
So the project that we've established with it's an FFAR Ag Mission funded project, which is actually funding out of the States. Um, sorry, I'm gonna turn that off. Um, the we have a project, and we ended up doing fall seeded cover crops just because of the timing of when this was started. The project started in the fall, so we just went
Okay.
after grain harvest, we seeded a cover crop in the fall. And the cover crop was fall rye and flax because I wanted more than one species. And we have it instrumented where we have soil moisture, temperature, and salinity sensors at high, mid, and low slope positions. So instead of hypothesizing what this is doing for soil moisture, we're trying to measure it. And I think that's going to be really key to actually having anything useful to say on this subject. I think it's valuable and important to have those cover crops in place in those zones where moisture is very commonly excessive, where there's compaction very often, where there's often some salinity. That's where your foxtails are growing. That's where your kochia is growing. Those kind of areas, there's obviously excess something there because there's weeds growing there. So that's it. Those zones I think are a pretty easy sell. There might also be benefits on the knolls because the crop is already not doing great on the knolls. You have probably a lot of erosion. We might be farming our bee horizon up on the knolls. Like there could
Yeah.
be some good benefits as far as trapping moisture, um,
Mm.
and in building soil organic matter on those knolls that would outweigh the yield loss.
Right.
But I want to actually measure that instead of just saying, well, we can't figure this out. Well, of course we can. It takes resources. So there's the issue of how much water are those plants using, and does it amount to more? Is that costing you in the subsequent crop? That's a crucial question. And it really depends on when you terminate that.
Okay.
If it's self-terminated by winter, I think that's relatively low risk. If it's still growing in the spring, that's considerably more risky. But what we did with our first spring where we had a cover crop to kill and we were seeding oats into it, we actually ended up leaving it for a while into the spring because it was relatively wet and they weren't going to be seeding for a while. So that rye was growing for quite a while, but they got in there and seeded that field under some pretty wet conditions. And that was done by the renters basically deciding when they wanted to come in with their 80-foot drill on some fairly moist canola stubble, I guess it was. And so they seeded through the cover crops, and then we of course have adjacent areas that are non-cover cropped for comparison. So we haven't analyzed any of our data, but we do have data on all of that from the outgrowing season to see what are we having a yield hit, or is there certain points in the landscape where maybe we're getting better establishment of the crop. The crop mortality in some of those low zones is really high, right? Because you're mudding it in, the structure is bad, and so possibly we could be getting some yield improvements in certain zones.
So if you have a cover that's overwintered, then in a dry year, you may make the choice to terminate it really quickly before it's competing for moisture. And in a wet year, you'd say, suck up some moisture. It'll actually seed better compared to this place that has nothing going on with it. And you can control that water flow a little bit by, well,
or you might be having a zone spraying operation in the spring and go out there and do some glyphosate early if you really feel nervous about it, and go kill it in all but 2 zones on like the fields we've got are all SWOT mapped. So we're trying to work kind of on the basis of those types of
Okay.
ideas, those zones. And we're in prairie pothole country. It is
Right.
some of the it's rather interesting. I think it's kind of fun, but it's a crazy place to run a research farm where it's full of potholes.
Yeah.
Um, so we've got lots and lots of this space where it potentially could be productive land, but it's plagued by drainage problems and excess. Well, just we've got these potholes full of water. They're functioning. They're doing some really good stuff. You keep trying to get closer and closer and closer to them on the dry years, and and then they flood, and there's nothing
Yeah.
growing on the margins of them, and then it's a kochia and foxtail patch. Like that, this is what happens with them.
Right.
And so we're trying to use the land base that we have and the techniques and trials we have to sort of showcase different management approaches. So sort of land optimization practices instead of saying we think we can farm every acre on this
Yeah.
quarter. Well, for sure we cannot. And I don't think a lot of those acres owe the world any canola. That's they have never have been in canola. They've never really produced any canola. So why do you think they owe
Is
the
it
world
not an
canola?
ideal relationship? Yeah.
No, no, but they might be a perfectly good grass and hay spot or something like that.
Yeah.
Like they
Okay.
can be functional and productive in some way, but stop trying to expect every acre to perform the same way.
Yeah. I appreciate that you've answered the water question in a complete way. How do we how do we think about nitrogen and the when um, when is the logic or the caution around including legumes in the cover crop or the shoulder crop? And I know lots of people talk about wanting to keep peas in the rotation, but if I throw peas into some kind of a cover crop once in a while, am I gonna blow it and create a disease problem by
Yeah,
overusing a legume, even though I like the nitrogen? And
yeah.
where, where does your curiosity take you on the innovations around clever ways to use pulse in
Yeah.
combination or in shoulders or
We've done an awful lot of work for years on a Phantomyces root rot. And
okay.
it is no joke. And the having lots of biology is not a silver bullet for solving Phantomyces. So yeah, I think we'd be really careful with hosts of Phantomyces going into um, in a cover crop mix and then being in rotation with also with grain peas or lentils. I think that's a danger zone. Um, but there are pulses that are not hosts of Phantomyces. So
Mhm.
now there's some of that that I'm not really sure on as far like I think there's some hosts of the forage legumes that we still have to be aware of, but I don't know to what extent they really exacerbate the problem. We probably
Okay.
need rotational trials like that to know is does a vetch or a red clover really exacerbate the Phantomyces situation for subsequent grain crops of pulses or not?
Right.
That's an important question. Um, but thinking a little larger, there are intercrops with things like the chickpea flax. I've been trying to advance that idea as a rotational way to help the Phantomyces problem because normally people that are in lentil country aren't necessarily a monocrop chickpea growing area because of moisture. And the same thing with the peas. People that grow peas aren't really a
Uh,
chickpea growing area, but you do chickpea flax and it changes the area of adaptation of that crop. So you
How,
could,
how so? Is it just the how they complement each other or
there's a complementary relationship where it's changing the maturity of the chickpeas, making them mature more evenly. And because you've got two crops that are using nutrients and moisture. So it tends to bring those chickpeas in a more timely fashion, but also reduces the disease. And that's been proven out year after year in replicated trials that they're now being written up for publication. There's some other locations have got things to publication earlier, but Bill May is working on a massive data set where and Michelle Hubbard particularly would be putting out the paper on the disease aspects of this. There's a substantial and reliable reduction in disease in the chickpea due to seeding it with the flax. And we don't know exactly the mechanism, but it's been observed reliably. When we have the disease pressure, when it's even enough across a trial site, we're seeing reductions. And so that's what helps to make the chickpeas possible outside of the core chickpea growing area. The chickpea flax works just fine in that core chickpea growing area also, but it can extend further out basically to the dark brown soil zone. I don't know how far north you can go in the dark brown soil zone before you're at too much frost risk. I know some people were getting pretty exploratory in 2019 and then had a very bad year with a not nice dump of snow in an early winter. So that was not the best year to test out how far can we push chickpeas.
That would be discouraging, yes.
That was definitely discouraging. But this is what we're coming out with on this chickpea flax work, is that we have changed the area of adaptation of chickpeas for the prairies. And that has huge implications for what pulses can people grow on the prairies. And the other really nice thing that it does is the residue left behind from a chickpea flax is better soil protection. You're not absolutely scraping the soil on this. Like, yeah, you still have to cut it relatively short, but the residue that's left behind is far more robust. It's got more carbon in it relative to nitrogen compared to a pulse stubble. So snow trapping of this is far better than it would be on a pulse on its own. So that goes for a lentil stubble or a pea stubble or a chickpea solo.
And it's still harvestable.
It's still harvestable.
Yeah.
We've been working on this for, I don't know, a heck of a lot of years with a lot of people doing this on commercial scale. The few times where this has gone kind of sideways was some of those years when there was snow, like heavy, wet snow going on this. And you need the chickpeas to be able to thresh the flax bolls, and the chickpeas need to not be squishy mush. So the problems was sometimes with those really bearish falls, that needed to come off before they get really wet and mush.
Yeah.
So that's some situations when it can go bad.
Yeah.
But there was a whole lot of other crops that were getting left out and bad also. And we have recourse to desiccant to pull the pin on the thing and get it. You can't necessarily just wait for frost to kill it, because flax will tolerate a huge amount of frost.
Yes.
And so will chickpeas. They're being the zombie crops that just kind of keep growing. So pull out the desiccant, say it's death time, go and kill it, and then get it through the combine.
Interesting. So that I think that there's a whole fascinating world there about a crop that you couldn't have grown on its own can possibly grow in combination with something else. That sets a lot of wheels a turning on how how fascinating have these combinations of possibilities become. I've experimented a little bit with peas and canola, and that seems pretty straightforward, but you've messed around with a lot of other combinations now, or you're aware of others that have messed around with combinations that which are the ones that sort of bring a smile to your face and go, wouldn't have thought of that, but that's cool.
Oh, well, somebody doing canola with chickpeas.
Okay.
I know of somebody doing that. There's um, I think somebody was doing canary seed with chickpeas. That's, and getting away from the chickpeas. It's like camelina and lentils. I've done. It's it's that was nice, and I only got to try it when we had 20 inches of rain,
Hmm.
and it still kind of worked. It wasn't a wreck doing the intercrop compared to the monocrop, but it wasn't an ideal situation either to have that much rain. That was way too much.
Those are
Uh,
both crops that like quite a bit drier, aren't they?
well, they both appreciate more dry conditions. And so there was a ton of disease, and you got to see how some of the synergies of holding things up off the ground and better airflow
Yeah.
and all of that, where um those are, oh, some of the new ones that I'm a bit excited about. I don't know. There's too many of them to pick a favorite. It's like pick your favorite child. I don't know. The chickpea flax is the one that I think the entire industry really needs to just get behind this.
Mm,
And by that I mean the pulse industry. It needs to
okay.
get behind this and be helping to sell this as a way forward for the pulse industry to keep delivering on on food and keep people
Yeah.
actually with pulses on their acres. Like,
Right.
I've been hearing a lot of people that are going to be dropping pulses out of their rotations because of root rot. And yeah, maybe you can substitute in some soybeans, but there's a lot of areas where we'd have a hard time making money at that, given that the seed
Yeah.
prices on that are very high.
Right. Is there I hear people talking about faba beans
Hmm.
agronomically that they kick out a lot of nitrogen and
Yeah.
they're cool crop. From an economic point of view, it seems like it's been a stretch, but is there something of the combination there where you in combination, you can get the agronomic benefit. And it's not about selling the faba bean, it's about what the faba bean crop did to its complement. I
I think there's good potential to grow it with a canola because of
okay.
the maturity. The maturities are can line up fairly well. Um, it it's, yes, got some strengths on its own. It's the marketing side that really holds the faba beans back. It's kind of, I don't know. In some ways, it's the kind of the redheaded stepchild of the pulse world, where it's good, but I don't know, people end up not having great opportunities to sell it,
Yeah.
maybe.
Okay. And you, as you self-described, being a general practitioner, um, outside of just cropping systems and how cropping systems relates to some other technologies, where do you see the optimism in other things that you think are showing some real soil health potential in either in sustaining or building soil health? What are the encouraging things on the horizon?
I think we're going to see uh, a biologicals product boom. We were already seeing it, and that's going to keep going as they're identifying useful biology that's doing all kinds of interesting things.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that's in some form of bugs in a jug. Um, but I think that's going to be where we're going to see a lot of product development. I don't think that's going to come as a surprise to a lot of people, but I think that's going to be that's where a lot of our new research inquiries are coming from. Is like companies that want us to test different biological products, not just rhizobia, like
Hmm.
going well beyond rhizobia and into what other
Yeah.
biology is there out there that if it can fix nitrogen, if it can reduce stress, if it can,
Yeah.
um, there's numerous things that they all can be doing.
Well, and I'm with the little bit of research background that I have. the evaluation of a bugs in a jug project is a lot different than a herbicide or a fungicide. You know, it kills it or it doesn't kill it. So
Yeah.
when we think about how we assess whether a whether a bugs in a jug product worked or didn't work, or what's fair in it
Yeah.
didn't work but it was dry, or it did
It's
did work but it was really wet. It's a lot fuzzier, isn't it?
it
And
is.
how
And
we
it's
assess.
we're like to try to design uh like a publicly funded trial. And we've had this suggestion a lot where, well, we want you to look at a whole bunch of different products and tell us which one's the best one.
Yeah.
Well, it's very tricky because is it a soil treat? Is it a soil treatment? Is it a seed inoculant? Is it a sprayed on with in some way? And anytime you're testing somebody's product, they have are going to be very concerned that you exactly follow instructions. Otherwise, it's not
Yeah.
get a fair test of it. But then if you show it doesn't work, then it's pretty easy to come back and say, well, you didn't use the right technique, or
Mm.
this wasn't the right land for it, or it wasn't the right conditions for it, or whatever. So it's a very thankless task to be trying to winnow out which of these biologicals are of have merit or not.
Yeah. But
But it should be there should be a requirement that of at some level that you prove efficacy of your product in
yeah,
order to be able to say that this is effective for doing such and such.
this is what I was going to say. We've all seen some things that have some pretty sketchy backgrounds, that have enterprises that have made some money and then magically disappeared.
Mhm.
Uh, so how we do that as a fair assessment, given that
Yeah.
it's a it's a different kind of assessment than you would do on a
Yeah.
herbicide or a fungicide.
Yeah. But
We need to make
it,
sense of
it
that.
the ones that are the easiest to do are granular inoculants. If they can just
Mm,
put it in a granular inoculant and we use it as a granular inoculant the same way as we do everybody else's, and then
mm,
you just get yield, then the cookie crumbles how it is going to crumble.
right.
And you run a few sites and years of that. We have done a little bit of that work with some biologicals in peas, where it was rhizobia plus kind of products,
Mm,
where they had extras in addition to rhizobia. Um, so that's kind of I think a relatively feasible thing to accomplish. But if you have all different ways of, oh, you have to apply this to this and add water and then let it sit for a day and then do this and this and this. Well, this isn't really very feasible for us to be doing this on 16 different products
yeah.
because you don't know that it's stable and available
Yeah.
that
Or anybody to do it on a commercial farm that's
way. Right.
16,000 acres. Yeah.
Yeah. But I hear about farmers that are basically having tanks where they can brew up their own biologicals based on that they've got compost. Like I was spoke at the soil health, that big soil health meeting in Edmonton last winter in December, and one of the guys had one of the farmers had hogs in these deep compost beds, like they were bedding in compost, and then they were taking that well developed compost that the pigs had been living in, and then extracting a, a liquid out of that and brewing it you're adding sugar to it and basically multiplying whatever is in there and then injecting that into as a band with their when they're seeding. And so that it's not so much that, yeah, there'll be some nutrients in there that's definitely there, but they're brewing up a mystery cocktail of microbes that people are doing on farm, and they don't have to ask for, they don't have to know what's in it, frankly. Um,
Okay. I
and
would
I
like them
don't,
to know whether it's working or not. I mean, I guess they're
well,
not.
yeah, and I haven't, decided I'm gonna go and at some point we might have to get some of these compost extracts and start running them through some plot drills. That sounds a bit messy and stinky, but
Yeah.
um, but I think we may get to the point where we need to do a little bit of that to go, well, okay, are we getting, is this a nitrogen benefit? Is there some really good biologicals that are being
Yeah.
stimulated in here? They're doing lovely things for the plants. It is entirely possible, but it's not something that's easily controlled. You don't know necessarily what sort of stuff is
Yeah.
hanging out in your compost pile, and it can
So,
change over time.
I guess you really are in one of these positions that um, if if somebody found 15 or 20 million dollars and said, we need to get it right for agriculture in the future, what what would you do, or who would you find as partners to do the next big things that you think would be the very substantial contributions to this industry that you've dedicated 20 years to?
Who would I pick for partners?
Who would you pick for partners, and what projects would you chase? What would be, boy, we gotta we
Yeah,
gotta we gotta do this, and that money would be well spent if we did this here and I did that with these people. What is
yeah.
that? What does that
There's
mix of
as
magic look
far
like?
as far as who, it's basically my mostly my current collaborators. I have some very
Okay.
good ones, and they know who they are.
Okay.
But I don't want to just call everybody out. They know who they are, and and what we would work on. Like Colin Rosengren, who's on our board, is saying perpetual polycrop is what he has
Mm,
vision that we need to develop this these really intense relays where like we could try to figure out how we can have perennials on and grain crops at the same time. Like, can you keep an understory and by spraying it occasionally manage to keep some sort of perennial muddling along? Or maybe it's a black medic. Like, I know black medic's not very nice if you have lentils. I've had experience with that. But
mm,
it's like maybe it is something that's more of a self-seeding annual that we just learn to put up with, and that's creating more good than harm. I don't know, but there's some of those things I think we can explore more instead of just trying to make little fiddly tweaks to a system that's gradually breaking down. Like, that's getting back into the cropping system thing, but
hmm.
we're not going to get our spray ourselves out of a herbicide resistance problem. And I wish people would really stop talking as though that we just have to create a more sophisticated strategy of spraying in order to spray ourselves out of a herbicide resistance problem. That's a major fault line in
Mm.
agriculture, that the earthquake is rumbling away, and we're running around doing what? Like, you're
Yeah.
not fixing the problem.
Yeah. Um, I, I've appreciated in what you've described um, your premise that these things, they have to work and they have to be economically sound, and we have to test them, um, and I appreciate that almost all of this conversation has been about what's practical for farmers. Um, there are certainly other voices that are now looking in on agriculture, going, "Are you guys doing responsible things?" In ways that they weren't 20 years
Yeah,
ago. They just wanted to buy groceries, and now, the connections to climate and sustainability
yeah.
and others have brought lots of spectators, for good reason, I guess, into thinking about this. Um, what what would you say about um, how, when we get it right at the farm level, there's these other benefits for the for society at large, or for value chains and for consumers.
There's really cool good news stories here
Okay.
in this kind of area that I'm working in. And but one of the headwinds to that is this desire to be protectionist of the status quo and tell everybody there's not a problem here, go mind your own
Mm.
business.
Mm.
And I don't think that serves the industry. I don't think they trust us, for good reason, because we're not being honest with as honest as I think is needed about that there is some shaky things with our system that for where we're going to use all the technology and techniques that we have available to build resilience into the system, and that is going to take work to have a resilient agriculture system going into the future.
Mm.
Um, that I don't think we it serves us to just tell everybody to mind their own business and eat their cornflakes.
Yeah. Lana, I really appreciate the time we've had here today. I know a bunch of folks kind of their head hurts a little bit when we talk about intercropping and some things that they're on their own farms they're not maybe quite prepared to do for logistics reasons, and others. Um, my hope is, and I'm pretty sure this is part of your view, is when they are ready, we better have tools available that they've been tested, that they've been stress tested at a farm level and other places. And your courage to go at some of those things earlier than most, I think, is a great service to those who are ready and those who might not be ready yet, but will
Well,
be at some point for some of these innovations.
yeah, and you can always be the person that's just being the curious neighbor too, and there's
Yeah.
a role for that.
Well, there's some important work that you've done, and I appreciate the time you've had for us today. Uh, Good luck in the next season of field trials, and you and all your neighbors around. I hope you get the weather you need to do your good work.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Bye for now.
Bye.